Welcome back. So tributes continue to pour in for the former Finance Minister and Reserve Bank Governor Tito Mboweni, who passed away over the weekend at the age of 65 after a short illness. President Cyril Ramaphosa hailed Mboweni for his contribution to the country's economic policy and its fiscal discipline. As we continue reflecting on the legacy he's leaving behind, we are now joined by the Reserve Bank Governor, the current Reserve Bank Governor, that is, Lesetja Kganyago. Governor, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. Upon hearing of the news of the passing on of Tito Mboweni, what went through your mind? What were you reflecting on, if anything at all?
Well, I mean, for me, it was like a life cut too short. I had the privilege of hearing that he is hospitalized, and we are still hoping for the best, because it was not like something we had expected, and he had just been in hospital for a very short period of time, and we just had a sense of loss. Tito was a figure larger than life when it came to policy making, and he leaves a big vacuum in our lives.
He leaves a big vacuum in our lives. Are you able, Governor, to speak perhaps maybe around the last conversation that you would have had with him and what his thoughts were?
Well, that's a very interesting one, because the last conversation we had, this is Tito. Yeah. We've got to break bread, he said, and then he said he is going to Ghana, and then when he comes back, we should break bread. He came back from Ghana, was unwell, hospitalized, and that was it. But I think that for me, Tito always talked about developments in the country, and he was a policy junkie. Tito was addicted to policy. Even when he had left the policy space and was now, for all intents and purposes, in the private sector, he still expressed very strong views about policy on all aspects of economic policy as we knew it.
Yeah, and then just reflecting also on the period that when you were the DG of Treasury and he was the Reserve Bank Governor, what was that relationship like? What sort of conversations would also be had around the trajectory of the country? And as your statement also points out, this is now the South African Reserve Bank statement around how he was able to steer the country during that global economic crisis in 2008.
Well, my relationship with Tito goes a long way. In terms of policy discourse, it goes back to 1990. And I think that if you refer to the period when I was the DG of the Treasury, it was actually, from a policy perspective, a very challenging period. You had two very strong figures, Trevor Manuel in the Treasury and Tito Mboweni at the Reserve Bank. They had very strong views on a range of policy matters, to the point that at times they would have serious disagreements and almost disengage from each other. And with our colleagues in the Reserve Bank and in the Treasury, we used to call it managing the two elephants, and that the institutions should continue to function. And the legacy that Tito left in that interaction between the Treasury and the Reserve Bank was to entrench institutional relationships such that even when the individuals were not there, the institutions continue to function. And one of the lasting legacies that he had left had been to put together a memorandum of understanding between the National Treasury and the South African Reserve Bank. That memorandum of understanding, till this day, is guiding the coordination of macroeconomic policy, mainly the interaction of fiscal and monetary policy.
Yeah, and then we fast forward to 2018. He now comes back, but this time around as the finance minister after Nhlanhla Nene resigned. You are now the Reserve Bank Governor, a role that he used to hold. What then became of that relationship? Now that you are the Reserve Bank Governor, he is the Finance Minister. And I remember also, because it came just after the ANC's elective conference in 2017, where a resolution was also taken around the reform of the South African Reserve Bank. And I know where his defense stood around the independence of the Reserve Bank. But was he committed to you as well to say that, listen, this is something that I'm willing to put up as well, and say that the independence of the Reserve Bank is non-negotiable?
Well, you know, in his very first budget policy statement, he said, I welcome the governor of the Reserve Bank here. Can you please leave him to do his job and stop bombarding him with useless conversations that are not going to take us anywhere? He was a staunch defender of central bank independence. And when he became the Minister of Finance, he also took up the pressure of us, because he said to us, listen, focus on your knitting, stick to your knitting. I will deal with the politics. And so we knew that we could now leave the big political battles to him, and he would fight those political battles. But Tito was not just, yes, he was a defender of central bank independence, a staunch defender of central bank independence. But I think that even at the treasury, he defended the treasury. So he believed in the integrity of institutions of policy making. And we know that institutions in this country got weakened to a significant extent for a protracted period of time. And the few that managed to stand their ground had to continue to be defended. And I think that when you write the economic history of this country, the contributions of Tito Mboweni would be amongst those that absolutely stand up. Whether you talk about labor policy, monetary policy, fiscal policy, even, for example, trade and industrial policy, just from his days as the deputy head of economic policy at the ANC, he was focused on the issues of trade and industry. He had a broad policy mind, and what a beautiful policy brain he had.
Yeah, and you speak about at the time when he was Reserve Bank Governor, Trevor Manuel was the finance minister, you were the DG. There was also a period where South Africa actually experienced a lot of economic growth. Some people wondering whether we'd ever be able to reach that 6% economic growth that was experienced during that particular tenure. What's your reflections on that?
It was that period was a sweet spot. It was a reward for policies that were adopted, policies that were prudent, policies that were based on evidence. And if South Africa was to look back at that era and look at the policies that were in place, South Africa would know that those policies stood us in very good state. Growth of 6%, of course we can achieve growth of 6%. What do we need are prudent policies, and understanding that policy making is about trade-offs. In policy making, there are only difficult decisions to be made. And we understand that when you make those decisions, there will be winners, there would be losers, but overall, the country comes out better.
Yeah, and just in conclusion, Governor, one thing that the MPC has spoken a lot about was the issue around electricity and the lack of electricity reliability. But now, at least we've experienced now 200 days of zero load shedding. But another problem is now creeping in, which is the water crisis. We are told that there's a day zero that is approaching in Gauteng, which of course is the biggest contributor to South Africa's GDP. From an economic perspective, is that a risk?
Well, to the extent that it happens, it would be very, very devastating for the economy. And I think that it is very important that decisions are taken much earlier. I mean, people are talking of day zero with water, and we are not even facing drought. It just tells us then that there is a significant problem in the manner in which we manage this important resource. We are a water scarce country. But I think that as you talk about this, I mean, one of the other important things, because we always talked about these problems with electricity, with water, what we have characterized as the structural reforms that the country needs. One of the biggest contributions of Tito Mboweni was to put what was called Operation Vulindlela at the National Treasury, which basically meant that we go out, look at those constraints in the economy, get those bottlenecks, and open them. And I think that you could see those results. A joint project between the Treasury and the presidency, and we can see those the results coming from there.
Thank you so much for your time. I hope that you weren't experiencing load shedding there, Governor.
No, not at all.
Not at all. It's just the lights that went off. Thank you so much for your time. The Reserve Bank Governor there, Lesetja Kganyago, reflecting on the life and legacy of one of his predecessors, Tito Mboweni.